Chapter 5 Lost in the Storm. Fall came early to the village, and by the middle of September ice started forming on the Bering Sea. When the strong north wind blew, huge ice floes filled the water as far as the eye could see. The little school opened again with Mr. Campbell as the teacher. Puni, with her newly healed leg, started in grade 1, while Yuki began in grade 3. His grade had 29 students from ages 7 to 17, all trying to learn to read and write. Although Yuki enjoyed school, he longed to be free, exploring the beach with Nansen. He didn't enjoy some things that happened at school. Some of the students made fun of their white teacher by playing little tricks on him. They tried to teach Mr. Campbell swear words in Siberian Yupik, their native tongue, and then laughed to hear him trying to repeat them. Yuki felt sorry for him, yet Mr. Campbell never raised his voice or became angry. Yuki admired the patient spirit and remembered the words of his grandfather. You can only tell by their lives. By November, the ice was finally strong enough and safe for ice fishing. Most of the sea ice was now about 18 feet thick and very jagged. But when the wind blew, the rough ice pressed together, thrusting huge chunks into the air and creating large cracks that quickly froze again. Then villagers chopped holes in the cracks where the ice was only a few feet thick so they could fish. Yuki spent his spare time fishing for cod. He let his line down with a plain hook down into the clear water and bobbed it up and down with quick jerks. So many fish were swimming beneath the ice that usually Yuki could fill a sack in the morning. He saved the largest ones for grandmother. The rest he put away to feed Nansen. Fishing was always fun. Many adults spent the short days out on the ice trying to catch the plentiful crab. A fisherman would carefully thread little pieces of meat on a long string that he dropped into the hole in the ice. Then he would wait patiently until a tug on the string showed that the crab had grabbed the meat in its pincers. After slowly pulling the line to the surface, the fisherman would flip the crab out onto the ice. The elders, the old men of the village, spent their days on the nearby roofs of houses. It was their responsibility to warn the people out on the ice of storms that could sweep down on the village without warning. When they saw a blizzard approaching, the elders stood and signaled the fishermen by waving their hands in sweeping motions. Everyone then stopped fishing and raced for the village as quickly as possible. Within minutes, a vicious, blinding blizzard would envelop the island. Grandfather spent a great deal of time with Mr. and Mrs. Campbell. Although Yuki had grown to love the couple, Grandfather's friendship with the Campbells bothered him. Rabat's power and influence made the villagers rude to the Campbells. Often people yelled at them to get off the island, unwelcome at any social functions. The couple lived a lonely life. Yet the Campbells were kind and courteous to all they met. One stormy night, Yuki lay in his bed, listening to father and grandfather talk. I'd like to go visit the Savuja, grandfather said. I want to see my friend Nathan Nungwok. I'd like to go too, but my lead dog has a lame foot, Yuki's father replied. Yuki couldn't strain his enthusiasm about traveling to the Savunga, a village on the other end of the island. He jumped out of his bed in a corner of the room and rushed to his father. Please let me go with you, Yuki begged. We would use Nansen, and you know what a good lead dog he is. Please, Father. Father looked at Grandfather with a question in his eyes. If I had a good lead dog, I would go, Father repeated. Grandfather seemed reluctant. Perhaps we can see tomorrow. Yuki crept back to his bed. He knew that to press the matter any further was not wise. For the next several days, a fierce storm relentlessly battered the little village. At the end of the third day, Grandfather made an announcement. Tomorrow the weather will clear. We start for Savunga. Yuki's heart beat faster. Grandfather would have said so if he wasn't allowed to go. The boy spent a restless night tossing and turning as dreams of Nansen leading the barking and excited dog team floated in his head. The next morning, Yuki's smile had no limits as his father, without saying anything, hitched up the dog team to a sled with Nansen at the lead. As the pale sun rose above the southern hills, the two men and a young boy traveled across the lake on their way to Savunga. The 70-mile-long trail followed the coastline, then threaded its way through the mountains. Markers made of driftwood posts that outlined the faint path were coated with thick layers of ice and snow from the constant wind that blew across the tundra. Father and Grandfather took turns breaking the trail while Yuki ran alongside. Nansen pulled hard as he led the team of dogs hauling Father's large sled loaded with supplies. The sun, rising in the southern horizon, cast long shadows across the trail for about 2 hours, then quickly set. They traveled all day, pausing only to make a hot drink. Toward evening, a bright moon lighted the trail as they started up the west side of the mountains. For Yuki, it was a majestic sight. He gazed across the endless expanse of the icebound Bering Sea in the distance. Great eruptions of ice towered in the air, and wide cracks broke the vast sea of ice. As they reached the summit of the first pass in the mountains, they stopped to heat some water and feed the weary dogs some frozen fish. Yuki sipped his hot drink and watched his grandfather slowly. He could tell by the frown on his face that something was worrying him. The boy kept his attention on grandfather, watching his pace back and forth by the sled, stopping occasionally to sniff the air. Even Yuki could sense a change in the weather. Within minutes after they had started on the trail again, a blizzard struck with deadly force. The howling wind pelted their face with the icy snow, almost blinding them. Yuki held his gloved hands up to shield his face from the frigid blast. Father tried to tramp ahead of the dogs and break trail. Soon he came back and shouted in Yuki's ear, "Let me drive. Get in the sled and cover yourself. Nansen will lead us to Savunga." "Mush!" Father yelled into the shriek wind. Nansen strained at the harness, pulling the rest of the dogs forward. Within seconds, Yuki could tell by the wind shifting on his face that Nansen was turning to the right. "Ha!" shouted Yuki's father into the wind. "Ha, Nansen, ha! Turn to the left." But Nansen continued veering to the right. Yuki watched as his father stopped the team and felt his way along the traces until he reached Nansen. "When I say aha, you turn, you stupid dog." The dog's behavior confused Yuki. Nansen had always been obedient. Never had he deliberately disobeyed. Again, they started blindly down the trail, and once more Nansen began turning to the right. "Ha! Ha!" Father yelled, and Nansen ignored him and continued heading toward the right. Yuki could feel tension mounting. Something is wrong, he thought. Something is terribly wrong. Father again stopped the team, and fought his way through the blinding snow to Nansen. Yuki could barely see Father slapping his dog across the animal's back, but he could hear Nansen whimper and watched him try to dodge the blows. Again, Father returned and urged the dogs on, but Yuki once more could feel Nansen veering to the right. This was more than Father could bear. Cursing under his breath, he felt his way along the traces, unhooking each dog, coming to Nansen. He hit him again and unleashed him. Then, returning to Yuki and Grandfather, he said in a flat voice, "We will have to wait out the storm here. I just hope it doesn't get colder." Yuki knew well the peril of the three of them that faced them. They were in a very dangerous situation. Often such storms lasted for days and dropping to 50 or 60 degrees below zero. Many an experienced hunter from the village had lost his life in a storm like this. Yuki began to think again of the Creator God. I wonder if Grandfather is praying, he thought. Without even intending to, he began to form a prayer in his mind. Creator God, I think you answered my prayer once before when I needed you. Please watch over us and make this storm stop. He paused and added, as an afterthought, and keep Nansen safe too. Then he drifted off to sleep to the sound of shrieking wind. For the rest of the night, the three huddled in the sleds, covered completely by reindeer robes. Yuki slept fitfully. Suddenly he awoke with a start. Throwing the snow-covered robe off, he looked around. The world was filled with a deep silence. The blizzard had stopped, and everything was still. A blanket of new snow draped over the endless landscape. Yuki scrambled out of the sled into the pale sunlight. Not a dog was in sight. He put his fingers to his lips and gave a shrill whistle. Suddenly a mound of snow erupted, and up popped Nansen's head. Then more huskies roused from underneath the snow. They had slept comfortably under a warm blanket of snow with their tails wrapped around their noses to keep them from freezing. By this time, Grandfather was up, scouting ahead for the trail. Within moments, he returned and stopped by Nansen and gazed thoughtfully at the dog. What is going to happen? Yuki wondered. He watched Grandfather pet Nansen on the head and say something to him. Where are we, Grandfather? Yuki said. Grandfather spoke quietly. We lost the trail. We are on the edge of some cliffs. Your dog Nansen saved our lives. He was taking us away from the edge of the cliff. If it wasn't for him, we could have all been killed. As they ate their breakfast, Yuki told Father and Grandfather how he had prayed to the Creator God to make the storm stop. Grandfather sat quietly for a moment. Finally, in a quiet voice, he said, So did I, Yuki. So did I.